Well, the hour had come. There's too much in our celebrations these days for us to absorb fully what it is that the church offers. Indeed, even this evening, as we commemorate the tragic torture of an innocent man, we are at the same time forced to ask the question, was he defeated or was it a victory? And we ourselves know that in that cross there was a victory. But on that night, what went through the hearts and minds of his mom and his disciples as they saw him confront death? In our lives, we all, at some point, in some way, some of you perhaps too young to ponder it at this point, but we all confront death. 8 years ago, this very month, 2010, I was diagnosed with breast cancer, and I became very aware that life involves death. The possibility is always there. And what is our attitude? What was his attitude? In my own process, which I'm sure is true for many who have confronted difficult circumstances, not necessarily even death, but tragedies in their lives, we go through a process where there's a changing face in some ways to the hope to which we cling. And at first, for me, as I began chemotherapy and the side effects, I just wanted it over, to get through it. Whether to live or die wasn't even a question. Just let me move on to the other shore. But as time unfolds, we discover, as we adjust to whatever it is in our lives we are given, that there is something there that we can learn. It moves from a stage of almost resistance and rejection to what seems to be in our way as far as the flourishing of our lives, to a time in which we think in this seeming tragic event, there is something there to teach us, something we have to learn. And as time unfolds even more, and sometimes that is very difficult, we discover in the end that we can be grateful. That's not easy, but in the end, gratitude is the only response. In Jesus' own experience of this agony, we find something very similar. Lord, if this cup could only pass me by. And what he must have felt genuinely at that moment as he wanted to resist and push it away and be aware that this is not something with which he wanted to be reconciled. But as he realized more and more how the events in some way would unfold, he knew that in this, he learned himself in a new way, as our second reading said. He learned obedience through what he suffered. He learned himself at that time something about his Father's love, something about his own destiny, something about what he was called to fulfill, how he in a way was being called to transform this tragedy into a source of new life. That this did not have to be the bottom line about his own life, that there was a victory in store. What is it that we ourselves learn when we come up against those things that push us back into a corner from which we cannot escape? Oh, there are many lessons which I'm sure all of us might talk about in different ways, but certainly one of the things we always learn is there are few things in life that are really ultimately significant. Oh yeah, we might be concerned with grades, with the job that we're going to get or we don't have, or something else that might, and for us that can be a life and death kind of issue. But what we learn really is there are few things in life that matter. As we hear this passion narrative from the Gospel of John this evening, there were three things that Jesus pointed out at that last moment that are of importance for us to know. It's often struck me that there he is on the cross, that what he's going to say would never be forgotten. He must have known that. Why did he not give us one last teaching? Repeat perhaps the prayer that he had earlier taught, just to be sure we would get it right. He knew at that moment that whatever he said would be remembered. And the first thing he said in the narrative we have this evening was, "Mom, here is your son. My friend John, here's my mother." In other words, he realized that before he took his last breath, he wanted to bring the important relationships in his life to some kind of conclusion in which he could trust. And he taught us the importance of relationships, of family, of friendships, that this is that direction in which he turned rather than another teaching. It was about relationship. And after that, he said, as we heard, "I thirst." Physical comfort, health, absence of pain, access in some ways to health care, whatever it might be, that this is also important in our lives. That in addition to being attentive to human relationships, the reality, the human reality, also the importance of that level of comfort within which, in a sense, we at least might be aware at those moments of our God, our Father's love. But after pointing out those two things, the value, the significance of relationship in all of our lives, and the importance of simply having enough, physically speaking, in terms of health and absence of pain, that we might be alert, he said, "It is finished." What was finished? That for which he had been sent, that to which he had given his life. Yes, indeed, all of those things. But in a way, it was almost like, as in another gospel text, he turns his spirit over to God because there is now some way in which a whole has been created. It's kind of come together. So this is it. This is what it's been about. In a sense, his life now had meaning and that meaning was made manifest. Now, there are other things in life that you might easily name that are very important, but these three stand out, that when we too confront death or other tragedies or difficulties, it's all about human relationships, sustaining a certain level of equilibrium within ourselves, and finding meaning in what we do and who we are, and being able to see that there is meaning there in our eyes and, of course, in God's. Sometimes in life, God seems to ask of us a burden that, humanly speaking, we are unable to bear. This evening, this Good Friday, it's worth our pondering that. For indeed, we are so aware that what his heavenly Father was asking of him was, humanly speaking, more than he could bear. The prophet Isaiah, in our first reading, attempts to also give us a framework within which that life makes sense. And later they were able to grasp that text from Isaiah in order to make sense of the tragedy that they had just experienced. But indeed, as we take a look at how Jesus himself might have understood what was going on, we see there something unfold that is of significance. Because, yes, something was asked of him, and it is asked of us at times in our lives, something that, humanly speaking, we can't bear, but are always given the grace to bear it, to be able to stand up under it, to hold it, to persevere through it. And the point will come indeed when we can then look back also at that with gratitude and thank God for what we have learned. Now, it may sound strange, but then this is a strange evening that we come together to celebrate this tragic event. But we do so because we know there's another side to the story. And we can look back and we speak about it even as, oh, happy fault. Easier to say about him than about struggles in my own life. But we can at a certain point look back, and it is with gratitude that in a mysterious way we have been invited, as St. Paul will put it, to share in the sufferings of Christ. Why? Because we are his body. And why should we be exempt from that which our Heavenly Father did not exempt him? Oh, there's a richness in what we celebrate these days, and too much for us to absorb, and words don't add more to our full appreciation of it. But just picture for yourself a moment. His mother, Mary, towards the end of our gospel narrative this evening, she is there at the foot of the cross. It's not only what he endures, as he says, "Mom, behold your son," and it is finished. It's come together. This is what it's been and is, and I have confidence in my Heavenly Father that he will bring out of this what he's intended all along to bring out of it. But what about his mother's heart?